Looking back into the past, one could say that there was nothing fateful about their meeting. A dark-haired man, head down, walked rhythmically along a garden path among flowers. The wind rustled the leaves of the tree crowns. A philosophy teacher once told him that fate does not exist. But there were moments when past coincidences were accepted as inevitable, and then he or she acknowledged it as fate. The lady walked under an umbrella along the flower beds. She was a charming blonde with large sky-blue sparkling eyes. Their meeting could not be called a coincidence. Approaching the young, gentle lady, the brunette straightened up. A beautiful white palace stood majestically in the middle of the kingdom. Tall trees grew in front of it, and the wind stirred their leaves, creating a quiet noise. And flowers filled the air with a pleasant aroma. The girl walked along the long, dark corridor of the castle. There was practically no light in it. Only rays, looking through the large windows of the room, accidentally got inside. Her steps were barely audible in the silence. The blonde clutched the letter tightly in her hands. Her fingers touched the paper with a slight tension, reflecting the excitement or importance of the content of the letter. The lady opened the door with a bang. Entering a spacious office with a large desk, she saw a brunette. He was writing something in a notebook, leaning over his work. The beauty called him by his name, Heiner. The young lady was dressed in an elegant 19th-century gown with long sleeves. She carried a message which she offered to read to the man in black. The blue-eyed blonde with long hair, gathering her courage, placed the package on the table. It was written on it that it was to be opened personally by Miss Rosenberg. The lady said with a trembling voice that it was not easy for her to dig into the young man's past. Without even raising his head, Heiner said that he was busy at the moment. The guy suggested postponing the conversation for later. Miss Rosenberg's interlocutor looked at her anyway. He had to put his paperwork aside. His features seemed elegant but at the same time rough. The lady was clasping her hands tightly. It was hard for her to say anything to this handsome man, so she decided to ask a question. The lady asked why Heiner was doing this to her. The innocent beauty stood in the middle of the office. Her blue eyes were full of tears. Miss Rosenberg repeated the same question. She did not understand why the man who loved her so much had changed so much. No one could interrupt their conversation now. The room was dark and cool. The guy said Annette's name, and she answered that now she knew why he had cooled towards her. The blonde continued asking questions. Her eyes showed despair and pain. The lady accused Heiner of deliberately approaching her to get acquainted. There was an awkward silence. Then the dark-haired young man confirmed her guess. Looking at the girl standing in front of him, he said that everything was as she said. The young beauty could no longer hold back her tears. She remembered their acquaintance and first meeting, and now it all turned out to be not real. It was a deception. The girl cried bitterly and continued to reason. A picture of Heiner putting the ring on her finger flashed before her. The lady asked how difficult it was to pretend when you love the daughter of your enemy. Miss Rosenberg was lost in her thoughts about the past. There, a young, handsome brunette man was looking at her with loving eyes. The hero looked impressive, strands of his hair falling on his forehead from under his snow-white cap. The lady in the wedding dress considered this meeting to be fate, but it was completely planned by Heiner. At that moment, the girl was incredibly happy and in love. She imagined her life as a fairy tale. The heroine went over all the wonderful moments of their meeting in her soul. Their wedding was unforgettable. There, the young girl kissed her beloved for the first time. The following events took place in the kingdom of Pedania. Among the ancient trees with mighty trunks there was a luxurious castle. In the center of the exhibition there was a beautiful fountain. The walls of this palace were decorated with beautiful portraits. One of them depicted the father of the family, Marquis Dietrich. He was the king's nephew and a member of the royal family of Rosenberg. The girl's father was a general in the army of the kingdom of Pedania. He dedicated Sir Valdemar, who held the position of corps commander, to his subordinates. On that clear day, the lovers met among the roses at the Rosenberg castle. 2 years after they met, they got married. At first, everything was perfect. The young woman thought that their happiness would last forever. She dreamed of boundless and sincere love until the end of her life. But suddenly it all ended. Amidst the flames, something happened that no one expected. The king was killed. The monarchy was overthrown by a revolutionary army and the nobility fell. These were terrible days in the Rosenberg family. The heroine's father was killed by the revolutionary army. The girl's mother committed suicide. As it turned out later, the commander-in-chief of the revolutionary army was Heiner. He was guilty of the king's death. His hands are bloody. Miss Rosenberg, despite everything, trusted her husband blindly, even if it meant betraying her father. Since then, everything changed dramatically. The guy became cruel and cold towards the young lady. He caused her physical pain. Their relationship was unbearable. The blue-eyed, naive girl loved Heiner with all her heart. She still couldn't believe that he had cooled towards her so much. The girl thought about it constantly. Why did the beautiful fairy tale end? Standing at the window of her room, Annette watched as the villagers demanded that the Marquis's daughter be punished. They blamed the Rosenbergs for everything. Heiner's wife made all these efforts only because she believed in his love. So she continued to think about everything that had happened for a long time, standing by the window. How suddenly her body shook. The rally in the street did not stop. The crowd shouted and made demands. Someone threw a stone towards the beautiful lady. The heiress of Marquis Dietrich abruptly closed the curtains and hid behind them. She was the only daughter of the military leader who oppressed the revolutionary army and citizens. Annette knew nothing about politics, and now it had become her job. Even if the girl lived, it still would not be life. The lady cried bitterly, covering her sweet face with her hands. The unhappy blonde sat in the center of the large room, hugging her knees with her arms. She was alone in the entire space of the world. But nevertheless, she expected Heiner to be on her side. Miss Rosenberg picked up a stack of papers and began to shuffle through them frantically. The white sheets only made rustling sounds in the silent silence. She was trying to figure out what she was doing wrong. Sir Valdemar's wife sat down on the sofa and began to quickly read some message. The girl realized that she would find answers to all her questions on this sheet. The sunset was stunning, but that red sky reminded the lady of what had happened to her parents. The answer was indeed contained in the letter that was delivered to the king's daughter. The girl with tear-stained eyes stood before him. She was clutching that very letter tightly in her hands. Her face expressed deep sadness and anxiety. She assumed that Heiner had never loved her. Standing in front of her husband, the lady continued the dialogue. She wished it wasn't true. But the commander-in-chief hesitated a bit, and then said that the girl was not mistaken. Their gazes met for just a second. Annette, her voice shaking, shouted at her interlocutor. She demanded an explanation from him, wanted to know the whole truth. The young man looked at Miss Rosenberg silently and intently. He did not know where to begin his story. Indifference and disdain were visible in his eyes. Finally, the guy collected his thoughts. In one breath, he said that he hated her father, Marquis Dietrich, and the entire royal family. Annette could not believe everything she heard. Now Heiner sat motionless. He frowned and thought about something, looking at their wedding ring. Then he said that everything was simple and began the story. Silence fell in the huge, bright office. The blue-eyed lady listened attentively to his every word. Her father's subordinate had revealed that getting close to her was part of his plan. Miss Rosenberg, full of despair and sadness, wanted to say something else in response. But she was in so much pain that the lady simply looked at her husband in silence. Tears welled up in her eyes. At that moment, it seemed to her that her heart was about to burst from such unbearable pain. The girl realized that she was also a part of his hatred, and nothing more. She could no longer hold back her tears. The young man sat silently, his hands folded. He stared at his wife. His expression was full of concentration and inner searching. Heiner began his speech slowly. 2 years ago, there was a big sensation when it was reported that the royal family was secretly training spies. The guy was very worried when he said all this. His gestures gave him away. At one point, he clenched his hands tightly. The young man continued to say that he was a spy at the training center run by Annette's father. Marquis Dietrich, having secured his position, was very glad that he was near him. "That's how I met you," admitted Valdemar. "It happened that day when they were walking in the garden among the rose bushes," the young man reminded her. The lady came up and told him how she had heard that Heiner had returned alone. The guy remembered how the girl smiled beautifully. She was dressed in a dress and chic jewelry, but at the same time, she expressed condolences to those who gave their lives for the country. The girl said this as if she was giving alms. The young man thought that he had made a mistake in his calculation. He continued his story. And anticipating the lady's questions, the young man gave an answer. If Miss Rosenberg wanted to ask whether she was part of his hatred, the answer was yes, she was. The blue-eyed blonde thought it was true love, and he got close to her, the object of hatred for revenge. Her question turned out to be just another story. The lady recalled those moments of true love when she was the happiest in the world. No one could even imagine that Heiner Waldemar hated Annette Rosenberg. The guy was sitting at a massive table in an elegantly decorated office of a huge palace. His expressive posture and attentive face spoke of the seriousness of the conversation. The blonde facing him thought about it, and later the beautiful lady instantly told her husband that she wanted to divorce him. The brunette sat with a motionless expression on his face, his hands folded in front of him. His gaze was directed towards his wife. Heiner said categorically that a divorce between them was absolutely out of the question. The young girl did not expect such an answer. She asked what was the point of their further marriage. After all, her father and mother were dead, and the monarchy had fallen. After all, she had nothing else. All she had was her property as Heiner Waldemar's wife. The lady said that his revenge was over. The guy angrily hit his hand on the table. Then the young man quickly got up from his chair and went to his wife. He grabbed the blonde's hand sharply. He clenched his fist tightly, about to hit her. The blonde was very angry and scared at the same time. The young man was furious. His hand was already clutching Miss Rosenberg's face. The girl's expression reflected horror and helplessness. The heroes met eyes. The brunette's gaze showed anger. He didn't want the young lady to be happy alone. Through the pain, Annette managed to utter a few words. The blue-eyed beauty replied that she had no place where she could be happy. Heiner's eyes widened in anger. He shouted that in that case, the lady would be unhappy for the rest of her life only with him. Miss Rosenberg understood at that moment that this man's revenge was only beginning. That day, the sun shone especially brightly over the kingdom of Pedania. Its rays pierced the roofs of the castle. Snow-white birds flew in the distance. All this created a feeling of warmth and freedom. The couple was sitting in the garden, among beautiful roses. The lady asked the guy how many languages he could speak. He answered that he could speak 4. The lady was surprised, as she had no talent for languages. They had fun together. They talked a lot. Heiner noted how well the young lady played the piano, and she said that now she is not quite sure whether this path is right for her. The brown-eyed brunette complimented the lady a little shyly. He assured Annette that her performance was excellent, and the young man was sure that she would become an outstanding pianist. Miss Rosenberg was very embarrassed. Her cheeks were flushed. She replied that the guy hadn't even heard her play, to which the brunette replied that he had realized this by looking at the girl's beauty. The couple sat in the middle of a large garden. It seemed that time had stopped and no one could disturb them now. The blonde thought her interlocutor was funny. She smiled constantly next to him. The boat, illuminated by the soft light of the moon, floated on the calm water. Heiner presented his companion with a beautiful ring. He asked if she would marry him. The girl cried with happiness. She accepted the groom's proposal without hesitation. The lady was very excited. The young man promised to make her happy all her life. They looked at each other with tenderness and love in their eyes. The smile never left their beautiful faces. It seemed that this love would last forever. The moon was reflected in the dark water around the boat. The sky was starry and quiet. A couple of lovers stood under the moon in a tender embrace, and the guy kept repeating that he would make her happy for life. He looked through Lady Rosenberg. The boy knew that this was just a plan for revenge. He couldn't give himself away. That would mean the end. Heiner Waldemar was looking forward to getting even with the Marquis Dietrich family. He was eager to see these people suffer. The man was pleased with himself. His intentions were about to become reality. The girl woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. She was shaking all over from fear and memories. The words her husband had said about how she would be unhappy with him forever were spinning in her head. Miss Rosenberg lay alone in the cold bed. Her hair was disheveled. Her blue eyes reflected sadness and grief. She thought to herself that she wished very much that all this was just a dream. In her room, over a hot cup of tea, Lady Rosenberg read a recent newspaper article. It said that the citizens did not want to watch the remnants of the Pedanian monarchy. She reread these lines over and over again. The girl's head ached from this news. She was fed up with it all. It was unbearable to endure it any longer. A loud rumble was heard in the quiet, empty kingdom. Someone was banging on the door. Annette was very scared, but then she plucked up her courage and decided to see who was there. She quickly ran down the stairs. There stood Major Eugene, her husband's loyal subordinate. He was heading to Mrs. Waldemar to tell her some important news. With a sly look, the major asked if everything was all right with her. His appearance greatly alarmed the young blonde. She knew that it was not good. The girl, with anxiety in her heart, thought about possible troubles. The lady politely replied that everything was as usual, and she carefully tried to leave the company of this man. She walked quietly down the steps. The major, without turning around, told her the important news. He said that the commander-in-chief had received a proposal of marriage. Lady Rosenberg froze after hearing the story. The girl stood motionless and listened silently. Heiner's subordinate asked if the lady knew Miss Annalie, and he told her that this woman worked with her husband. Since her father was the central force in the revolution's victory, the public would follow her. Major Eugene laughed sarcastically and asked the blonde's opinion. Did she think they were a beautiful couple? Mrs. Valdemar smiled with relief. She wanted this very much herself. Finally, her life would become normal. Apparently, the man was gloating. He said that it would soon be covered in the media, and he hinted that the lady would not have long to blossom like a rose from their garden. The lady sank into her memories. Newspaper excerpts flashed through her mind. People wanted her downfall. Every day the newspapers asked to destroy the remnants of the previous monarchy. The letters of condemnation and intimidation came countless times. Being with Heiner was like hell on earth for the girl. Annette felt like she was in a net. The major was openly gloating. He said that the commander-in-chief's wife was ruining his reputation. The man was going to tell what people were saying about this marriage. The lady interrupted him and answered that she asked her husband for a divorce, but he did not accept the offer. It seemed that Heiner wanted to see how unhappy she would be. Major Markov could not believe it. With despair, the lady realized that she had realized everything too late. She decided to ask the interlocutor to help her. For the first time in a long time, their intentions coincide. The blonde was incredibly upset that everyone hated her. She clenched her fist and looked at her wedding ring. What made her think that her husband would love her like before, she thought. It was dark and quiet in Lady Rosenberg's bedroom. She had been resting in her huge bed for a long time, all alone. Suddenly there was a knock, and the doors creaked open. Heiner Valdemar entered the room. He called out to his wife, but she did not speak to him. It seemed that she had been asleep for a long time. The guy quietly sat down on the edge of the bed and turned to the girl. He probably knew that she was not sleeping and asked him to listen. The commander-in-chief said he had tried to back out of the marriage quietly, but the article had come out. There was no turning back, he said. If that's what you're waiting for, you'd better give in, the lady replied. He looked reproachfully at his wife, and after a short pause he replied that she would not be able to leave Pedania anyway. The unhappy blonde thought about how much her own husband hated her. She wanted a divorce. The lady wondered why the guy was so afraid of the word divorce. Still, Miss Rosenberg decided to engage in conversation with the brunette. People think she's doing well, and it's all thanks to the commander-in-chief. They don't understand why he won't divorce her. The guy had nothing to say to these words. He sat silently and looked into the distance. And the lady, exhausted by everything that was happening, barely got up from the bed and continued talking. A guy and a girl were sitting together. A ray of sunlight was breaking through the curtains into the dark room. The lady told him that she was ruining his reputation, and therefore he needed to get rid of her. The blue-eyed blonde asked the guy if he was so upset with her that he was even willing to take losses. In her thoughts, the girl thought that Heiner wanted to see the lady fade away next to him. The brunette replied that he didn't know where she could live well if she left the kingdom of Pedania. Annette laughed and replied that he simply thought she had hidden her property from him. But she had nothing left. The beauty had no one to turn to, and he knew it. The brunette reminded the girl that her father had excellent connections. Some of his subordinates had fled abroad. But Miss Rosenberg replied that these people did not need this place if they had fled so easily. Her husband's appearance in the darkness seemed even more powerful. The lady begged him for a divorce. The guy replied that he would not listen to this anymore, no matter how much Annette wanted it. The Marquis's daughter sat on the bed and stared into Heiner's eyes. She hadn't noticed how dark his eyes had become. He was as mysterious and unlike himself as when they first met. Miss Rosenberg thought for a long time about how much she liked her lover's smiling face and friendly voice. Everything she liked about him was not real. Memories of their first kiss among the roses in the garden flashed through her mind. The lady thought about how happy she was at that moment. The blonde caught herself thinking that Heiner was an excellent spy. The girl lowered her head and said that she didn't want to live with him anymore. The brunette asked why she decided that. He thought that the lady hated him for betraying her. Annette screamed at the top of her voice that she didn't hate him. The guy sitting next to her flinched in surprise and opened his eyes wide. He couldn't understand how this could be. The defenseless girl replied that she did not hate anyone, even if everyone in the world hated her. The lady said that she simply had no right to do so. That morning, Miss Rosenberg sat in her room reading the morning papers. They wrote that she was a remnant of the monarchy and demanded its destruction. Heiner's wife knew that she still didn't understand politics very well. But now this lady had clarified two things well. What are human rights and what is democracy? It was as if a fire was burning in her chest. Lady Annette finally understood why people had destroyed the monarchy and created a new government. Everyone said it was her fault. The commander-in-chief was very angry. The guy did not understand whether his wife really understood what she was talking about. A beautiful lady sat next to him, her hands folded, looking at the ring. She kept saying that she didn't care what would happen to her next. The girl only asked him for a divorce. The girl's hands clenched tightly. She was shaking all over, although the bedroom was very warm. Miss Rosenberg decided not to show her pitiful appearance to the man she loved so much. The brunette got angry and slammed his fist on the table. The veins were visible on his strong arms. Annette's words divorce, divorce, divorce kept ringing in his head. The commander-in-chief quickly moved towards the lady and grabbed her by the shoulders hard. He told the lady that she seemed to be living a pretty good life, since she was constantly talking about divorce. The guy's gaze was cold and frightening. He thought that she could never dream of freedom and happiness. The blonde remembered the moments when she loved Heiner. This was the only reward she had received. Now her husband only wanted to watch her suffer next to him. As he was leaving, the young man told her that a banquet was coming soon, and Miss Rosenberg was obliged to accompany him as his wife. Would her husband really drag her there by force if she didn't want to? The brunette was furious. His breathing and gestures betrayed his mood. Miss Rosenberg's uncomfortable questions were driving him crazy. The guy did not hold back his emotions. In anger, he said that if the lady did not do his will, he would lock her up in a mental hospital. The blonde's eyes widened. She was shocked that they could do this to her. Heiner warned her with hatred that she should not think of running away. The commander-in-chief had enough power and he could find the girl wherever she hid. The brunette stood in front of Miss Rosenberg, his full height. His gaze reminded her of the gaze of a predator on the hunt. He warned the marquise's daughter that she had better do whatever he told her. The young lady pressed her lips together in disappointment. She knew that Valdemar had been like this from the start. He had approached her with a specific purpose, and the girl herself had fallen for this lie. That's why the girl lost everything she had. Memories of their love haunted Miss Rosenberg. She remembered how tenderly the young man held her hand. The blonde immersed herself in those moments when they loved each other. Annette still hoped and was sure that her husband would return to her. After all, they were so happy together. Her warm memories were interrupted by the commander-in-chief's voice. The guy demanded to answer his questions. The girl with blue eyes shuddered in surprise. She didn't understand why she hadn't realized this before. Love that arose from selfish motives was not love. Annette considered herself a complete fool. Suddenly, she heard the doors close. It was her husband leaving the blonde alone in the bedroom. From all this pain and misunderstanding, Mrs. Valdemar covered her face with her hands. The girl cried bitterly from despair. The lady understood that she would not be able to sleep in such a situation. She abruptly opened the chest of drawers where all the medicines were kept. Her gentle hand reached out to the paper packages. Miss Rosenberg took the medicine that was kept there and took several pills. She wanted this evening to be over quickly so that she could sleep peacefully. The blue-eyed blonde was depressed and exhausted. She considered the pills to be the only salvation in this situation. But suddenly the girl's gaze fell on some small, beautiful box. She opened it with curiosity and saw many unfamiliar pills inside. Heiner's wife stood in the pitch darkness, leaning over the nightstand. She looked at herself in the mirror with pain in her heart. The thought flashed through her mind to drink all those medicines from that box. The following events took place in the Green Kingdom of Pedania. The girl was talking to Dr. Arnold about the medicines she had taken during the night. She looked very depressed and helpless. The lady asked the doctor to prescribe her some other pills, because these ones did not help her get rid of the headache. The man explained that there is no cure for all diseases. Migraine is a common disease. The girl was surprised. Would she really have to live with this pain all her life? Dr. Arnold looked at her closely and nodded affirmatively. You just have to be patient for a little while. Miss Rosenberg complained to the doctor that she had been very nervous lately and had a temperature. The lady said that in general she did not feel very well. The doctor advised Mrs. Annette to lie down less and to add physical activity. He also noted that Madame was very sensitive to even minor inconveniences. He took a pack of medicines out of his suitcase with no pleasure and put it on the table. The doctor informed the girl that he was not her personal physician. He worked for the commander-in-chief. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by servants who were trying to say something to Madame Valdemar. The girl politely said goodbye to Dr. Arnold. She was puzzled and upset that he could not help her. In the center of the hall hung a luxurious chandelier, casting glare on the dancing couples. Ladies in exquisite dresses and gentlemen in suits waltzed to the music. The evening passed in a festive atmosphere. Heiner Valdemar and his wife entered to the music. The lady was dressed in a dress decorated with shimmering patterns. Next to her was her husband, in a tailcoat. He attracted attention with his graceful manners. Various people began to approach the commander-in-chief. Among them was Mr. Schmidt, whom he had known for a long time. The brunette greeted him and congratulated him on the opening. While the men made small talk about how Mr. Schmidt's business was directly dependent on the commander-in-chief's investments, Miss Rosenberg stood off to the side the entire time, as if she wasn't there. The subordinates every now and then approached their master to greet him and express their respect and deep reverence. The Marquise's daughter stood aside and watched her husband. The thoughts in her head were mixed up and did not give her peace. The lady tried to understand the reason why her husband brought her to a place where she was not welcome. The girl felt uncomfortable in this place. Hundreds of eyes were watching her. It seemed to her that people were talking about her all the time. Their glances were rather dismissive and intent. Madame felt defenseless and out of place at this ball. Miss Rosenberg was very lonely at that moment. She tried to drown her sorrows in alcohol. The lady reflected that in this way her husband wanted to make her even more unhappy. The beauty drank glass after glass, and her thoughts were confused. She thought that there were places where the crimes against her were clear and obvious, like at such a party. Very loudly, Mr. Schmidt asked the commander-in-chief how his marriage with Miss Annalie was going, to which the brunette replied that he had been forced to decline such an offer. Mr. Schmidt was surprised by this answer, because people said that they would be an ideal couple. The commander-in-chief said that the answer was obvious. He did not know why he had received such an offer. Frowning, the brunette turned his gaze to the Marquise's daughter. He suddenly remembered with displeasure that he had a wife. The blonde touched the glass on the table. She was sad that she was treated as if she did not exist. It hurt her to hear a conversation about her husband's future marriage openly in her presence. Annette felt that she was being treated cruelly. She looked down into the glass and was already pouring its contents into herself. The brunette approached, squeezed his wife's shoulder with his hand, taking the glass from her hands. She asked why her husband did this to her. But then a sound from the stage caught their attention. A man was asking if the guests were having a good time on this cold autumn night. The host announced that a special guest had been invited for all those who had come to the opening ceremony of their hotel. It was a musical genius among pianists named Felix Kafka. Miss Rosenberg froze at the very name and became all ears. It seemed that in order to examine the celebrity, she even rose on her tiptoes. The guests applauded the brilliant pianist who had won first place in world competitions. He was a beloved musician in Padania. Our heroine had no hope of hearing him play again, especially in such a place. The maestro's hand touching the keys plunged those around him into the melody that flowed cantillanily from the instrument. It was Nocturne No. 2. Annette listened with a thrill in her heart. She had not played the piano for 3 years, but she had not forgotten this beautiful melody, mentally replaying the piece of music. Felix Kafka devoted himself entirely to playing the instrument. It seemed that he himself received enormous pleasure, and from keys to keys, through his hands, musical history was constantly transmitted. As a messenger who recreated an idea, he was Annette's idol. Ever since the day the blonde first pressed the piano keys, she dreamed of listening to the maestro's piano performance. The man, having finished his performance, enjoyed the well-deserved delight of the audience. Earlier, Annette dreamed of becoming such an outstanding and virtuoso pianist. She even met Felix a couple of times thanks to her father's connections. Then the blonde was able to get an autograph from the maestro. They communicated and supported the talented pianist. But a lot has changed since then. Now Felix Kafka was a successful genius performer from the common people. Miss supposed that the pianist must have really despised her then, not being able to express himself. She assumed that she guessed what the musician was thinking about at that time. only now everything was different. The girl became sad, lowering her head. Her husband called her by name. At this time, one of the ladies who had also been invited approached them. She asked Mrs. Valdemar, checking her guess that she too played the piano. Smiling, the lady said that if Annette didn't mind, why didn't she play something for them too? The blonde confirmed that everything was correct, but she said that she was not in shape at the moment and refused. But the lady did not back down, reminding her that she had taken 3rd place in an international competition. The lady remembered that Miss had once opened a concert with a solo performance. The blonde assured that she had not played for a long time, and now it would not turn out well. But the interlocutor did not calm down, calling her modest. The brunette insisted that she had heard that Annette had been taught to play the piano since childhood. She refused, looking back at her husband and seeking support. But he behaved distantly. The lady did not calm down and literally pushed our heroine towards the instrument. She assured that everything was fine. Annette could not believe that her husband did not even try to help her. Kafka was also watching the ladies, and our heroine was wondering if her performance would make everyone feel better. She assumed that everyone was happy to see how a woman born an aristocrat became one. Annette's hands with thin white fingers trembled. After all, there was a reason why she couldn't fail to live up to everyone's expectations. The girl closed her eyes, preparing to play the melody. But then her name was called. Annette's blue eyes widened. The voice insisted that they had to run. The blonde was scared. The speaker insisted that there was no time for explanations and hurried her. She saw a silhouette with a gun in his hand. He urged her to hide behind the mansion. A deafening shot rang out. A moment later, the Marquis was lying in a pool of blood. The girl realized with horror that it was her father. The voice said that they had agreed not to kill. The man with the gun in his hands insisted that he had shot by mistake. And now his barrel was pointed at the blonde. The men recognized the lady as the Marquise's daughter. Annette's eyes filled with tears. The men who entered said, smiling broadly, that it seemed the lady played the piano freely, and they considered it very noble. The light in the window of the palace hinted that there were people there. With the lamp lit, the brunette sat at the table with documents. Frowning, he cursed under his breath. Then, at the opening, the brunette could not understand what was wrong with his wife. Annette felt sick. She said she wanted to be home. Now that he thought about it, the husband realized that this definitely looked like a trigger. He clenched the paper in his fist angrily. It was strange for a woman who hadn't cried in 3 years. He couldn't understand how a woman who lived in a luxurious mansion and a quiet environment and freely threw parties could have an injury. The papers flew from the table to the floor, knocked down by the brunette's hand. He cursed into the emptiness of the dark room, and he couldn't believe that his wife could get so upset because of playing the piano. Heiner remembered her cold and calm look when she asked him for a divorce with an absolutely indifferent expression on her face. The girl asked if there was anything useful left in her. The husband was sure that she was useless, but he also admitted to himself that he could not part with her so calmly. The brunette told himself that he had endured so much to get Annette, and it didn't matter how irrational his actions were. He held his head, cursing for the umpteenth time. A beautiful young blonde with light blue eyes and rosy cheeks sat at the piano. It was a youthful and lonely, awkward and unrequited love. Heiner kept telling himself that it was simply the past, which he now wanted to erase from his memory forever. Annette couldn't sleep. The evening conversation with her husband made her think. Turning on the light, she entered. The bright and cozy room was illuminated by dozens of lights, but the gaze of the beautiful and unhappy girl was directed at the object located in the center. Slowly, with a sad and tired look, the beautiful blonde pulled her cape. A beautiful and elegant piano appeared before her eyes. It was her constant companion throughout her childhood and youth, an instrument that never let her down. The blonde looked at it tenderly. The girl carefully opened the lid of the piano. Lined up like a parade and glittering in the light of the sconces, her favorite ivory-colored keys were ready to play. The blue-eyed beauty remembered the smallest details. After all, her music, like magic, made listeners forget about everything in the world. But now Annette was not happy about anything. Moreover, the beautiful blonde could not even touch the keys, afraid of hurting herself. After all, there was enough of it, she thought. Her thoughts took her to the past, to where the blonde was once happy and doing what she loved. After her father's death, the girl lost everything. How could this happen? Annette could not find an answer. The lady wanted to return to her childhood. at least for a minute, to where she was protected by parental care and love. She enjoyed every moment of her little life. She needed the strength that was taken from her. The young woman sat in front of the instrument, broken and crushed, not understanding how to live on and what to do. She did not have the strength to fight the man who had taken advantage of her and betrayed her, but something inside her told her to act. Despite everything, the blonde placed her hands on the treasured keys. The first notes sounded uncertainly, as if old memories were coming back to life before her eyes. Her hands were shaking, but the lady continued to play, hoping that music would heal her wounds. Her heart was filled with memories of those days when music was a source of joy for her, not pain. It was getting light. The majestic palace proudly greeted the morning. The sun, painting the sky in yellow and orange shades, made it even more solemn and monumental. Along the wide corridors of the palace, quickening his pace, Heiner hurried to meet the doctor, who was visiting his wife once again. The news was disappointing. The young girl refused to eat at all, and this upset the brunette. Without thinking, the brunette knocked loudly on his wife's door, making it clear that his intentions were serious. The man walked in abruptly, but she didn't even look at him. The girl was embroidering, but it was obvious that this activity did not bring her any pleasure. Heiner was worried by the fact that the young woman had recently stopped going out, spending her time in her room. The husband continued asking questions, but no answers followed. The brunette suspected that this was a protest against him and their life together. But he didn't want to hear about divorce. His attention was drawn to the chest of drawers where the medicines were lying. Was Annette really ill? He wondered. The man wanted to see the sparkle in her wonderful eyes again, like when he had conceived his dastardly plan. The young man came closer to the chest of drawers and abruptly opened the cabinet. She was indignant because the brunette was violating her boundaries. But a small green box was already visible in his hands. Heiner looked at her carefully. Shaking the box in his hands, the brunette waited for an explanation. These were the pills the doctor had brought her. He infuriated her with his actions, selfishness, cruelty. The blonde wanted to divorce the man who did not love her. Her husband took away her medicine. But what else could she expect from him? She tried to protest, but no one responded. Why had her man changed so much, she thought. She had loved him once, but now she doubted it. The brown-eyed brunette slowly walked past the bed where his wife was sitting. He needed to feed her by any means necessary. The blonde, her head down sadly, continued to embroider. Would Heiner really stoop so low as to force-feed her? Flashed through her mind. But no matter what he did, she was no longer surprised. Approaching the table, the man took the letter. It was an invitation, but continuing the conversation with his wife, he noted that there were more successful methods of death than hunger. There was a knock at the door and a courtier brought in food. Annette knew he would not stop in his urge to feed her. The man continued to insist, and she, biting her lips, could not even look at him. He looked at her and realized that her love for him was flying into pieces, but he could not stop. The girl asked him to leave again and again, saying that she was not hungry now and would eat later. But her husband could not be stopped. He had simply driven her crazy. Annette, unable to contain herself any longer, began to scream. Her protest came from the depths of her soul. She was not afraid of the consequences. The man's face changed. Her words and emotions made him wary. A completely different person stood before him. She turned her back abruptly and abandoned her embroidery, which had long since ceased to interest her from a hobby standpoint. Looking at her husband's face, Annette said that everything was different now. She was worthless, powerless, and crushed. She was nobody to him, and her husband didn't know her at all. The young man could not believe that this was his wife, the woman he loved and hated at the same time, saying this, that she knew about insignificance. He didn't understand why she spoke about herself like that. After all, she hadn't changed since the moment he met her. His wife was still just as majestic and beautiful. The man suddenly remembered his childhood, hard and hungry. The lonely boy was an outcast. Back then, he was a nobody. But now Heiner kept silent about it, and now he had to feed her. He controlled every spoonful she ate. His wife silently carried out his orders. Annette was crushed. His gaze fell on the embroidery, carelessly thrown down in anger. What ugly stitches, he thought. The man couldn't understand what had happened to her ability to embroider. After all, before his eyes lay an incomprehensible mess. The brunette for a moment remembered the cheerful and happy Annette, running towards him with an insanely beautiful scarf, embroidered by her lovely hands. He looked at the drawing thoughtfully and thought about how this could have happened. If the brunette hadn't known who had embroidered it, he would have thought it had been a child. His wife called out to him. It was the first time in a long time that he had heard his name. She was asking him to let her go on a trip alone for a while. That was out of the question. He knew he would lose her. She thought about it, trying to remember the moment when she started asking him about trips, why she did it, and how she didn't notice that he began to limit her freedom. The girl put down her spoon. He had work to do, but now he was wasting his time. The brunette was starting to get angry. Her husband threatened to send her to a mental hospital if he did not stop her whims. But she did not care, as long as she was away from him. He slammed the door loudly and left the room. She froze. Annette hung her head sadly and did not move. Disappointment was written on her beautiful face. Life was losing its colors. Accepting everything as it was the only solution. Meanwhile, the young man picked up the phone in his office. He needed to talk to the doctor. On the other end of the line, the doctor confirmed that he had prescribed the pills in the green box, and that they were sleeping pills. Having finished the conversation, the brunette was once again convinced of the correctness of his thoughts and actions. The girl would not leave him so easily. She would not have enough courage. The man looked at the box long and thoughtfully. Why was everything so complicated in his life? He remembered moments of happiness and it made it even worse. But the next moment the pills were already flying into the trash can. No, my wife won't get rid of me, he kept saying. Meanwhile, the brunette approached the large mirror in his office. Maybe she was behaving like this on purpose to constantly annoy him, he thought. Hanging his coat on the hanger, Heiner kept thinking about how she knew nothing of humiliation, fear, or bottom, and how could she know about beatings, hunger, and suffering? He knew that she was afraid of what she did not understand. He continued to look into the mirror with thoughtful eyes. The brunette remembered their first meetings. Annette admired him like no one else had ever done. She considered him the most worthy man and saw him in the role of her husband, and he dissolved in her. The blonde loved his eyes, deep and intelligent, as if the whole world with all its joys and sufferings was reflected in them. The blue-eyed beauty emphasized his importance. She considered Heiner the most courageous man she had ever known. Looking into her bottomless, sky-blue eyes, he did not understand how to separate love and duty. The brunette could indeed be happy with her, but he served his people, and she was just a tool to achieve his goal. Heiner closed his eyes. It hurt him to think about it. But now he hoped that Annette was desperate and unhappy. After all, she was married to him, and his circle condemned her. Revenge. It was the only thing that moved him. His base instincts wanted her to experience what he had, and the imprint of a past life that gaped on his body was already appearing in the reflection of the mirror. In front of him stood a Pedanian mercenary. Heiner knew what pain and suffering were, so in her moments of suffering, her husband had to be by her side. The blonde slowly left the room. He loved and hated at the same time. It was a heavy cross, but the man was sure that time would put everything in its place. It was a beautiful summer day. Miss Rosenberg was relaxing on a bench in the garden. The birds were joyfully circling in dialogue, and the fountain noisily throwing up water was trying to amuse her. Annette looked into the distance. This was not how she had imagined her life, and even the beautiful garden did not please her. The woman felt tired, despite the beginning of the day. Thoughts like butterflies in a garden fluttered in her beautiful head. She was looking for something to heal her wounded heart. But suddenly a strange idea came to her. Perhaps they needed a child. It could bring them closer, awakening lost feelings. Memories of the evening they had spent stirred her soul. Heiner still came to her cozy bedroom, which they had loved so much before. They felt good in those pleasant moments of intimacy. The brunette was not gentle with his wife, but he did not reject her either. Annette was happy in those short and pleasant episodes of her life. But even during moments of intimacy, the man remained clothed, which seemed extremely strange to her. Heiner had a secret that he hid from his wife. They parted coldly, despite the wonderful time they had spent together. He never invited her to breakfast after a night out. She knew she could be pleasant company for him. The blue-eyed beauty was left alone in the cold room, loved and unloved at the same time. He left quickly and without looking back. It hurt her. Sitting in her big bed, Annette often thought about what had to happen for her husband to love her. She recalled a relationship that was full of passion and tenderness. Meanwhile, the warm sun, gently stretching its rays to her face, gave her hope. Was Heiner trying to live with the false hope we had created together? Miss Rosenberg wondered. Annette closed her eyes and looked up at the sky. She thought that this could be the perfect day to die. But at that moment she was called out. The blonde, hearing soft steps and an unfamiliar voice, looked around. A girl was approaching her. The brunette was dressed in rather simple clothes, clearly indicating that she was from a simple class. Annette guessed who it was. The girl who approached demanded attention. The newspapers were suffocating Miss Rosenberg with their clumsy accusations, and the brunette only fanned them. The lady remembered how Major Eugene, her husband's subordinate, spoke about her. Her red short hair gave the girl confidence. I wonder if they served together, the blonde thought. The strange guest's genuine interest in her person did not bother the beautiful blonde at all. The lady pretended to be indifferent to the presence of the uninvited guest. The brunette unceremoniously asked questions, to which Annette answered calmly and indifferently. As it turned out, meeting Heiner's wife, a well-known person in Podamia, had been a long-standing desire of the newcomer. She was interested in everything. She knew that the young woman rarely left the house. It seemed that today was a day of stupid statements, Annette thought. Miss Rosenberg asked the stranger to introduce herself. Miss Annalie, the brazen simpleton replied. The brunette's interest grew, but the image of the woman in the newspaper clearly did not match what she saw. Her piercing green eyes were searching for a new story. But with her fists clenched tightly, the beautiful blonde kept the remnants of calm, although it was not easy. After a short pause, the brunette stated in an affirmative tone that Heiner did not agree to a divorce. She did not surprise Annette at all. She was even upset by this information, because this is what she wanted so much. Having settled down next to the blonde, the simpleton hastened to inform her that she did not like Miss Rosenberg. Moreover, she did not like her, and felt disgust towards her. It was funny. With her mission, the red-haired beast tried to free the respected Heimer from his disgusting marriage. And in order to finally, as it seemed to her, humiliate Annette, she added that the blonde was not suitable for him as a wife. The girl's beautiful face lit up. She calmly stated that it would be better to talk about divorce with her husband. The brunette tried to threaten and warn, but the woman only looked at her with contempt. The arguments were exhausted. Emily thought about it and said that she would involve the council and the media, and also force Heiner to give up the marriage. The lady was tired of her. She turned to Annalie and said that she knew who was manipulating public opinion. It was she who had made Annette take the blame for something the girl had not done. But the beautiful blonde did not stop and continued. She calmly added that the accusations were exaggerated and blown out of proportion, but that did not change her guilt. The brunette was discouraged. The young woman's upbringing and noble origins prevailed. She no longer blamed anyone. She understood everything. The conversation was clearly over. The red-haired girl was disappointed. After all, she wanted to destroy Miss Rosenberg. The girl was clearly disappointed with the failed conversation, but Annette was already leaving. She told the restless brunette that the divorce issue was not within her authority. She advised her not to worry about it. Heiner's wife moved slowly towards the palace. So thoughtful and sad, she understood that this marriage would soon come to an end anyway. The morning press was full of news and headlines about the volume of support received by the association. A servant stood at the threshold. She announced the arrival of a guest. The unknown gentleman asked to see Annette. The young woman was surprised. What good news! Hearing the name Oscar, she was incredibly happy. But not even half a minute had passed when a fair-haired young man burst into the room with a fresh breeze. His smile and open arms showed that he had been dreaming of meeting her. He was shouting her name loudly. It was Oscar Stetter. If anyone could make her happy at that moment, it was him. Annette smiled as best she could. They hadn't seen each other for many years. The handsome blonde even proposed to the young girl, but she refused him, after which he quickly left for abroad. Stetter grabbed the blonde unceremoniously in his arms, pressing the small body tightly to his chest. She knew that the man's family had perished during the revolution. He was left completely alone. Meeting the girl at that moment reminded him of the best moments of his life. But Stetter noticed that the girl had changed. Oscar couldn't stop admiring her. Blonde hair, delicate features, huge blue eyes, and beautiful hands. Before him stood the beauty he knew, but thinner and tired. Annette invited him to sit down. He had written to her but had not received an answer, so he decided to come in person. The girl understood why the letter had not reached her. Her husband was in control. He did not believe that the commander-in-chief's wife could be in such a position. and she was in a hurry to tell him that she had become known as a villain. He was worried about her, because Pedania was gripped by anti-aristocratic sentiments. The girl asked about his affairs and plans, hoping for pleasant company in the following days. But he was not going to stay, citing business. He only wanted to see her during his business trip. Lady Rosenberg asked him not to hurry, but to tell her everything over tea, which was already being served. But he had so many emotions that they could have been enough for two. The blonde breathed heavily as she listened to his gripping story of salvation. He was a breath of air in her dark world filled with lies and cruelty. The blonde was happy about his success. This position was so suitable for an intelligent and smart man. Ambassador of France. One could only dream of this. At that moment she felt light and good. The young man was drinking tea and the girl was enjoying his company. They talked for a long time. He had to get married and divorced for citizenship, but he did not regret it. Putting down his cup, the blonde looked at her carefully. Annette held her breath. Algar had spoken of coming all this way for her. He knew, of course, from the newspapers that she was in danger and needed protection. The unexpected question about divorce from Heiner frightened her. Confused, she did not know what to answer. Upset, the beautiful blonde lowered her head, returning to her usual world. Discussing this topic was pointless. But what she heard next shocked her. The blonde handsome man was suggesting that she run away to France. She certainly didn't expect that turn of events. Annette sat there, confused and thoughtful, and he held out his hand to her. The girl did not yet know whether she could trust him. She understood that by leaving her husband, she would bring all sorts of problems upon herself. He promised her a calm and happy life, freedom and the opportunity to be herself again. His proposal was simple but filled with hope. Annette was confused. Her heart was torn between the possibility of freedom and the remnants of love for her husband. She remembered how Heiner had once offered her a life full of joy and love. Fear paralyzed her body. The beautiful blonde could not make a decision so quickly. The shadow of her husband, reminding her of his promises and threats, stood before her eyes. Algar insisted. He couldn't leave her in Pedania, it was dangerous. The young woman, torn between fear and hope, asked again for time to think. They sat opposite each other. The young man suddenly realized that he had been pushing her too hard. Giving her time was the right decision. He was ready to wait. Lady Rosenberg, with her head down, considered this strange and unexpected proposal. But she was clearly upset. Having left a business card and written the hotel address, the blonde was about to leave, when suddenly he added that they needed to go straight to the room, bypassing the reception desk. This worried and alerted her, but a second later his gaze became open and cheerful again, like in childhood. But the girl understood that they both had changed. Annette remembered those wonderful days when he came up with the most exciting games and she happily followed him. They said goodbye on the go, hurriedly and crumpled. Oscar was clearly in a hurry and even more afraid of meeting Heiner. The door slammed shut. Annette leaned against it and looked at the business card carefully. The lady doubted the sincerity of Oscar's feelings for her, and his proposal was dangerous, no doubt. But her involvement in politics over the past year told her that his visit was not accidental. The girl suddenly understood everything. He was a monarchist, and she was of royal blood. It all fit. Miss Rosenberg knew that in Pedania, under her husband's leadership, almost all the supporters of the monarchy had been killed. And that's why the aristocrats fleeing to France needed help. Her help. The image of Oscar appeared before Annette's eyes again. He, like the damned society, wanted to take advantage of her. Frozen with the business card in her hands, she thought about how by making a deal with the ambassador she could get rid of Heiner forever. She had to make a choice. Perhaps the most fateful choice in her life. The night was swallowing the majestic palace. The mistress of darkness knew her business. Only the light from the windows illuminated the sleeping garden. In the huge living room sat two people, Heiner and Annette. A long table surrounded by flowers and candles hospitably arranged a feast. Without knowing the circumstances, one could say that this married couple was happy. He glanced sideways at her, about to ask about what was bothering him, but he was waiting for the moment to speak. She, with her eyes downcast without an appetite, but as always lately, picked at the cold roast beef on her plate. He knew all about Oscar Stetter's visit. He was displeased, but he waited for his wife to have dinner. It was important to him now. But the girl was in no hurry. He picked the right moment and began. The brunette started talking about the purpose of the French guest's visit to the residence. Annette froze, and her heart started beating faster. The man was interested in the details of the conversation. She knew that the nosy servants had reported it word for word, but he didn't have enough information. Or rather, it was enough, but Heiner wanted emotions. With effort, stabbing the meat and washing it down with red wine, the brunette wanted to hear the story personally from his wife. Annette looked away, trying to collect her thoughts. The conversation was about divorce. Oscar had invited her to France. She answered quickly. There was nothing to talk about. Heiner put his hand on the glass and held back his emotions. The brunette was interested in her intentions to marry someone else, but the girl didn't even think about it. He was starting to get angry. Perhaps they were secretly communicating behind his back, the brunette suggested, but he didn't ask, although the man was thinking about her betrayal the least. The beautiful blonde lifted her head abruptly and opened her eyes wide. The young woman assumed that her husband had not read Oscar's letter to her. He gripped the glass tightly. The daring notes in her voice excited him. The brunette did not read the letter because there was no need, but he did not give it to her. They were drifting apart, and this table, decorated with an expensive tablecloth, was a witness to that. The brunette reminded her once again that she would never leave this palace. The room was filled with the scent of burning candles and flowers. They talked about empty things, or they could talk about the feelings they had for each other. Anne wondered if Oscar could bring peace, joy, and happiness back into her life. But there was no doubt that she would be unhappy with Heiner. Her thoughts returned to the events of the day. He was trying to keep her with the bonds of marriage, she thought. The blonde did not understand his moods. The girl remembered that she was always happy when she met Oscar, and today was no exception. But suddenly her face darkened. After all, Stetter, like Heiner, wanted to take advantage of her royal blood, her reputation. She understood that she could become a weapon in the hands of a vile man. Looking again at the crumpled business card, Miss Rosenberg decided that she refused to participate in this game. The weak woman did not want revenge, like the strong of this world. Yes, it had been quite a busy day. Details of another conversation were floating around in her head. She was trying to figure out why Annalie and Major Eugene's opinions on Heiner's divorce didn't match his. Strange, she thought. The girl was completely confused. Annette looked at her husband and did not know how to sort it all out. If she had been more attentive and not so focused on her feelings, she would have understood him and answered the question of why he was against it. The lock of the bag clicked loudly and cheerfully. Its owner was going on an incredible journey. The brown color of the bag surprisingly matched the unusual outfit. The hat with a huge bow, matching the dress, quickly migrated from the box to the head of the beautiful model. The green dress did not match the mood of the owner, but it suited the circumstances. Frightened and beautiful, she stood in front of the mirror, and only a person who did not know her could not notice it. She walked up to the door. The guard was at his post. When did her house become a prison, she thought. Gathering up the last of her courage, the lady loudly announced that she was heading to church. He was following orders. Making up a story on the fly, she added that she didn't want to disturb her husband over trifles. The guard thought for a moment, but the lady did not back down. In a tone that brooked no argument, she declared that she should not ask permission to pray. A minute later, Miss Rosenberg stood behind the massive iron gates of the palace, waiting for the carriage. The script she had devised was coming into action. Yes, it was a challenge, but first and foremost to herself. Annette looked around, hoping that she was not being followed. But this was the last thing she believed. She could already imagine the obsequious courtiers reporting on her. The sound of the approaching carriage brought her out of her stupor. The charming blonde was counting on his speedy arrival. The driver helped her into the carriage. She quickly disappeared into the huge dark space. His question made the girl think about what she was doing. He simply asked where she was going, to which Miss Rosenberg quietly replied that she was going to Lanchester Station. The pot-bellied steam locomotive arrived noisily and whistling at the station. Dark clouds of smoke flying out of the volcano's mouth fell on the passengers waiting for it. The hospitable station greeted its guests. Passengers with children afraid of getting lost quickly moved along the platform. Miss Rosenberg stepped into the crowded third-class carriage and sat down quietly. An elderly, middle-aged woman sat down opposite her. This would make a good news story, she thought with bitter humor. The veil that hid her face allowed her to spy on those around her. For the first time, she found herself among ordinary people who read the latest press and discussed the events of the day. The woman opposite, her hands folded in a characteristic pose wrapped around a crucifix, was praying quietly. Looking at her, the blonde remembered her mother, who would probably pray for her now. With her eyes closed and her back away from the crowd, she was clearly with God. Annette was curious about what this lady was praying for. Waltzing with the rails, the locomotive ran towards her dream. The landscapes changed outside the window like frames in a movie. She was told that everyone receives an answer from God. But the girl had not believed in this for a long time. After all, she prayed so hard. Under the sound of the wheels, the girl could not remember the last time she had visited a church. Kneeling in the temple, she prayed for forgiveness and happiness. But God did not hear her. But now her thoughts were on the sea. Fleeing from control and tyranny, she wanted to see it not only in her dreams. The sound of the wheels reminded her of the past, turning the pages of memory. Noticing this look, the woman opposite could not remain indifferent. Putting her hands on the Bible, the lady in the brown dress turned to Annette. She offered help to the lady, which she did not need. Annette often sighed, feeling nervous. Smiling sincerely and warmly, the woman made the girl smile in response. But the beauty was in no hurry to tell her secrets. The woman's curiosity was troubling her. The fellow traveler advised the beautiful blonde not to travel alone, to which Annette replied that she was married, but their relationship was on the verge of divorce. The subsequent question about children upset Annette a little. After all, there were no children, and the chances of having them were quite small. She became embarrassed, but the woman, hearing about the lack of children, perked up, advising the blonde not to be upset. "No children, no problem," she said. But it seemed the woman also had problems finding noble men. The lady looked tenderly at Miss Rosenberg. The details of the blonde's relationship with her husband interested her most of all, and the girl was ready to share. The carriage rocked from side to side. The passengers went about their business, and Annette began to narrate. The blonde said that her husband's people did not love her, and that even her death would not change anything. The woman sympathized and did not believe that such a beauty could not be loved. But this, unfortunately, was the truth. The train was picking up speed, taking her away from the pain and despondency. The old woman advised Annette to surround herself with people who loved her. It wouldn't be easy, the blonde thought. It was impossible to order people to love her, she thought. Having done nothing to deserve such hatred, she was only guilty of being born. She understood that everyone who loved her and who cared about her were dead. She knew no others. But there was a man in this world who cared that she had set out on this journey alone. Her dream would soon come true, she thought. And the locomotive, accelerating, pulled her carriage with all its might, hurrying to show her the beautiful paradise. The sky stretched out over the serene seashore. Its golden and pink hues were breathtaking. Seagulls, gracefully gliding on the air currents, circled over the sea, making cries. People walking along the sandy shore, inhaling deeply, enjoyed the fresh air. Annette looked into the distance. Her long, light hair was caressed by a light sea breeze. The charming blonde was in euphoria. The sea opened up in its boundless beauty. And the girl, standing on the shore, enjoyed the perfect picture. Annette recalled moments of her youth when she dreamed of love on the beach. The sea air gave her strength and energy. After marriage, she had no chance to get to the sea. She walked slowly along the shore. Her small feet in neat shoes sank into the warm sand. Looking closely, the girl saw an artist standing at an easel. He interested her. The blonde came up. It was a great idea to capture this day. The girl decided to buy paintings with a seascape. He did not rush her with the choice. The artist was struck by her refined beauty and offered to make her a model. He was ready to draw her for free, although he was about to leave. Annette was worried that the man would recognize her. She didn't want anyone to write about her again. She was wondering whether to take off her hat or not. After all, the veil hid her face from those around her. The artist did not insist. In her charming hat, she looked quite romantic, he noted. But freedom had already burst into her heart. It demanded action, courage, and pleasure. Annette took off her hat abruptly. The girl wanted the artist to draw the real her, even if he found out who she was. It didn't matter anymore. The man sat her down against the backdrop of the orange sky and the sea she loved so much. She was beautiful. The artist set to work. His brush flew across the canvas. Miss Rosenberg came to life on the canvas, but she was in a hurry. The blonde, curious, glanced at the portrait from time to time. She thought that she didn't look happy enough in the sketch. She asked the man to add more emotions. He accepted her terms of the game, drawing elements of happiness, inspiration, freedom, and peace. Inspired by the beautiful stranger, the artist finished the portrait. Miss Rosenberg laughed loudly. The man added the sea to her eyes and the warm dawn to her hair. The artist stopped her in her rush to capture the best that this beautiful girl had. Together they finished the portrait, she with emotions and he with talent. Annette came closer, and seeing herself on the canvas, she couldn't help but smile. She was like a seagull, playful and free. She was tormented by doubts that she looked different in life. But the artist drove away her doubts. The beautiful blonde was amazed. The lady bought a couple of pieces. She wanted to keep a memory of this wonderful day. It was a good decision. The charming blonde chose what she thought were his best works. The marine theme captivated her. Her gratitude to the artist knew no bounds. The girl wanted to stay here as long as possible. The sea awakened long-forgotten feelings in her. But she did not have long to rejoice. She was experiencing the best day of her life in the last years. Her happiness knew no bounds. She was free as the wind. Heiner, watching Annette, remembered their first meeting in the garden. But now her laughter and life-filled gaze hurt his pride and increased his desire to regain control over her. The evening gave the sky purple and pink shades of sunset. The moon lit her way, and the stars, winking cheerfully, created a playful mood. Leaving her shoes and bag on the shore, she decided to go into the sea. Her dream came true. She could hardly believe it. What bliss! The girl marveled, standing ankle-deep in water, her hair tousled by a pleasant sea breeze. Picking up shells and pebbles from the bottom, the charming blonde cheerfully threw them into the water, enjoying the process. The waves left cool traces on her body. The girl moved deeper, lifting her dress. The shells she liked the most she carefully put into her jacket pocket as a keepsake, just like the paintings she had bought that day. And the sea sang its songs to her about endless spaces and free winds. She listened to its songs and wanted to live on. Time stood still. She moved slowly towards the night, enjoying the moment. The sea embraced her and healed her wounded heart. Feeling the water envelop her thighs, she knew it was time to return to shore. But it was not easy. The wet dress and the increasing wind limited her movement. The fragile girl tried to find a solution to this problem. He watched her from the side and saw how the waves aggressively rolled over her fragile body. The man could no longer watch it. Suddenly, Annette felt someone grab her hand tightly. The blonde screamed in horror from the surprise. She saw that the beach was empty, but these hands were already dragging her to the shore. Annette felt his breath. Turning around, she saw familiar eyes. Heiner was looking at her. He was outraged by what she was doing. In his eyes, she saw fear and tenderness. A few hours earlier, he had been informed that Miss Rosenberg had left the palace and was heading to Lanchester Station. Heiner could not accept that she had set out on her journey without an escort. Heiner did not understand what she was thinking at that moment. Without wasting any time, the man notified all the stations and checkpoints to pass on all information about his wife. Waldemar already knew that she was heading to the station. The brunette was in as much of a hurry as he could. Annette was heading to Glenford. An odd choice for a girl who hadn't traveled alone, he reasoned. The station was like a hive. Everyone was bustling about and chatting. The young man saw her and realized that she was okay. Hiding behind a newspaper, Heiner began to follow her. Miss Rosenberg sat modestly on the bench. Her husband noted her stern expression. She had no intention of running away, he decided, but he did not understand why she did so. The brunette squeezed the newspaper tightly. He was angry, thinking about the blonde going to Ausgar. But remembering the dinner the night before, he ruled out such a turn of events. To drag her into the residence by force now meant never knowing the truth. But curiosity gave him no peace. The brunette wanted to understand the reason for her escape. Heiner entered the carriage and sat down so that she would not notice him. The girl sat with her head down, holding tightly to her bag. Perhaps this gave her confidence. But he wanted to be closer to her. The man sitting with his back to her was not against changing places for a small additional fee. If it was possible to come up with a worse carriage, this was it. Third class, the brunette thought sarcastically. Does she understand that? The man was sitting behind her. A few minutes later, Heiner heard a familiar voice. She was telling a complete stranger that everyone around her hated her. And what's more, even if she dies, the blonde added, no one will notice this event, including her husband. Waldemar confirmed her words. He didn't care at all what happened to her, Heiner confirmed, continuing to read the newspaper or pretending not to. But the brunette couldn't imagine his beautiful wife in a coffin. This thought made him shudder, and he thought about it. As the wheels clattered, An elderly woman placed her hands on the Bible and advised her to accept those she loved and move on with her life. The brunette tensed up. Such statements seemed strange and funny to him. But what advice could the old lady give? After all, the charming blonde had no one but him, the man thought. And they would be together until the end, he repeated to himself for the 100th time. He didn't know what to call the feelings he had for her. But now the man was going to stay with her, even if it wasn't love. The coast was quite busy. People were walking along the shore enjoying the sea views. But Heiner did not notice this. His wife in a green dress moved against the background of an anxious sky. Valdemar walked slowly, keeping Annette in sight. She was so engrossed in the sea that she did not notice anyone. The boys playing on the shore reminded him of his sad and difficult childhood. Her face was shining with happiness and pleasure. The smile did not leave her lips at that moment. He caught himself thinking that he was admiring her. Her dream had come true, but her husband didn't know about it yet. Her behavior seemed strange to him, and the idea that someone was waiting for her on the coast didn't leave his head. But she approached the artist, who apparently offered to paint her portrait. She sat down on a chair against the backdrop of a wonderful seascape. The brunette, even from afar, saw her face lit up with a smile. She laughed loudly and communicated with the artist, breaking all known etiquette. He looked at her, surprised and confused. Now he sincerely wished that she would smile at him. After all, once upon a time she had. Heiner remembered the time when they had loved each other, and his name was constantly on her lips. It was a vivid episode in his terrible, unhappy life. Annette cheered him up in moments of sadness. She inspired him to action and simply loved him as the most worthy of men. She married him and became the best wife in the world. The girl was ready to share her life with him when she swore eternal love. But now he was wasting his time spying on her and remembering the events of the past years. Clenching his fists, he looked at her with tension and longing. Her behavior angered him. The young man allowed her to be happy and free but suffered at the same time. Valdemar wanted to punish her, but the brunette couldn't move from the spot. And she, meanwhile, thanked the artist for the successfully painted picture. And for the feelings he gave her. What was happening to him, the man wondered. Looking at her smile, he couldn't move. Annette was taking his heart away from him again. But now they stood wet and tired on the seashore. Annette understood that this meeting was inevitable. Heiner, not hiding his irritation, asked her to collect her things and put on the shoes that she had so carelessly left on the shore. Her bare feet ran along the shore in search of things. The blonde understood that her spiritual holiday was over, and tears welled up in her eyes. But suddenly she screamed. A sharp pain shot through her leg, causing her to finally start crying. He approached, not understanding what had happened. But she was moaning and pointing to her leg. Well, of course, now she arouses pity in me, anticipating punishment, he thought. She stood on one leg, wet and upset. The man wanted to leave the beach as quickly as possible. The shoes and bag quickly migrated from him to their rightful owner. Heiner grabbed her in his arms. Blood was flowing from her bloody leg. The brunette couldn't look at it. The blonde, not expecting such an action from him, asked to let her go because she could walk on her own. He rejected her indignation. Annette struggled, but her fragile body gave in. On the way to the hotel, the blonde asked why he came for her himself and didn't send servants. These were empty and stupid questions. And out of the darkness, the hotel was already emerging. Lanterns illuminated the paths to the front door. A man was walking quickly along them, carrying his wife in his arms. He walked towards the reception, ignoring the people in the lobby. Right now, he was worried about the availability of a hotel room. Everything else was just decoration, and the girl, embarrassed, caught sidelong glances from those present. She felt ashamed and awkward. In an attempt to hide her face, she pressed herself tightly against her husband, not expecting such actions from herself. He, sensing her message, was surprised. She was clearly thanking him for saving her, he reasoned, not knowing how to react. Reacting to his wife's impulse, he hugged her tighter. Meanwhile, the concierge was ready to listen to him, although he was surprised by what was happening. Heiner urgently asked for a spacious room. The concierge, without asking questions, handed over the key to the penthouse. The bag and hat, witnesses of her escape, sadly flew onto the table, ending up under her feet on the carpet. Now their owner had no time for them. The bathroom door, opened by the brunette's foot, creaked quietly, greeting the new, strange inhabitants. Heiner carefully lowered Annette into the bath. The girl did not understand how to behave. His strange reactions frightened her, but now she was grateful to him. The wife, blushing, asked to be left alone. She knew, as it seemed to her, what to do, and she also needed time to come to her senses. He left, leaving her in the huge bathroom with columns. Now he didn't want to leave her more than anything, but his wife insisted. The blonde opened the tap. Water flowed down her legs, but the blood did not stop. The girl began to worry. Perhaps the wound was quite deep, she thought. Annette could not believe that her life was becoming sad again so quickly. She slowly tried to move on one leg, but the brunette, without moving from his place, waited for her by the bed. Ready to help, he indicated that she needed to sit down. The brunette opened the first aid kit. Her little leg quickly found itself in his reliable hands. The man bandaged it with concentration and professionalism, but he tried not to cause her pain. The brunette scolded her for breaking etiquette and putting her life in danger. And the girl, enjoying his hands, thought about how she had never seen his body. She blushed. Her leg hurt, but her soul hurt even more. At that moment, it seemed to her that the old feelings were returning to her, like the sea she had seen today. The husband continued to scold her, tightly tying a knot on her bandaged leg. Or he could have told her how scared he was at the moment she ran away. Beautiful and confused, Annette sat on the edge of the bed, lost in her thoughts and distanced from his reproaches. He asked questions that had answers right there on the surface. Heiner, kneeling on one knee as on the day he proposed to her, still holding his bandaged leg, was already asking the last question in the hope of hearing a clear answer. He asked her if she really wanted to swim in the sea and not drown. At that moment he looked stupid with the remains of the bandage in his hand, realizing one thing: he did not know his wife at all. Annette stared at him wide-eyed, not understanding what Heiner wanted to hear from her. As the interrogation continued, her mood worsened. The girl was still sitting on the bed, and he was holding her leg in his hands. Miss Rosenberg wanted to swim in the sea because the brunette saw everything. What was the point of the questions? But he continued, holding his bandaged leg. The man had wrongly suspected her of wanting to meet Oscar. He had realized this when he saw her frolicking on the beach. The blonde repeated that she wanted to get her feet wet. She didn't understand what the problem was, but Heiner didn't back down. The brunette couldn't understand how his wife, who was afraid of everything in the world, could do such a thing. There had to be a good reason for such behavior, he reasoned. He continued without stopping. About the bag, about the things she had left unattended on the beach. Waldemar had the goal of humiliating and trampling her. Heiner accused her of putting her life in danger. She set out on a journey alone, unaccompanied. He even entertained the idea that she might have been kidnapped. The lady tried to justify herself, but Heiner was not interested in her words at all. Annette gave in, realizing that he could not be stopped. The woman sighed and said that he was right, hoping that her husband would shut up. Perhaps the brunette would have kept quiet, but not now. Gritting his teeth and leaning forward, he declared that he had always been irritated by his wife's behavior, that everything had changed in this world, but not her. At that moment, the man was like a tiger ready to pounce on his victim. His words about her being a disgusting blue-blooded woman struck her right in the heart. Annette, dreaming away to where she thought they were happy, tried to understand when he had started to hate her so much. Was it really from the moment we met? She thought. The girl understood that his love was lost, but her heart did not want to accept it. Miss Rosenberg asked him if he was perhaps mocking her when he confessed his love. This question seemed strange enough to Heiner. He looked at her questioningly. But Annette did not give up. She continued to search for the remnants of love in his heart, irritating him even more. The girl did not understand how it was possible to love a woman whom he hated to death. She accused him of pretense. Miss Rosenberg, sitting on the huge bed with her head down, continued asking questions. But Heiner, finishing bandaging his leg, paid no attention to them. Annette added sadly that she loved him. The brunette muttered that he doubted her words, but she did not give in. Annette, clenching her hands into fists and placing them on her knees, added that she would repeat to him what she had told him 3 years ago. Yes, terrible and irreversible events happened in her life. The kingdom fell. Her parents died, and he was to blame for their death. At that moment, sitting on the floor of her bedroom, hugging her knees, she cried. Annette understood that he did not need to lie to her anymore, because the brunette had achieved his goal. But now, despite everything, she still loved him for these 3 years. Heiner turned pale. He clearly hadn't expected such words, at least not now. He found it hard to believe. Meanwhile, the girl added that she was waiting for her husband to return and smile at her as before, and love her again, as before. The young woman was clearly suffering and picking up her heart piece by piece. Her beautiful blue eyes looked at him sadly. He couldn't believe his own ears, or he didn't want to. How could she love him if he was deliberately hurting her? But he still asked her again about her love for him, because deep down he wanted to be sure of her words. Streetlights shone through the half-open window. They tried to illuminate the character's feelings. The brunette didn't know what to answer her question about love. One thing he knew for sure was that even if he loved her as much as before, he wouldn't be able to say it. Annette listened to him and did not understand why he was so afraid of being judged. After all, she was his wife, and they were completely alone in this huge room. The hastily closed tap beat out a set rhythm. It tried to attract attention, but no one noticed it. Annette came out of the bathroom. Her wet hair fell softly over her sloping shoulders. Her pretty pink robe with lace gave her a romantic look. She walked into the bedroom, throwing a towel around her neck. Her gaze fell on the green travel bag that had joined her things. It sat peacefully on the couch near the bed. Annette carefully stepped on her injured leg and approached her bed, glancing at Heiner out of the corner of her eye. The brunette clearly wanted to stay in this room. Sitting down at the dressing table, the beautiful blonde looked in the mirror. The events of the day were reflected on her face. The man pretended to read the newspaper, but he was thinking about her, as was she. The lady did not want to invent anything. Tired of the games the man played with her, the girl quietly asked if he would stay or leave. But the husband continued to sit, staring at the press. Suddenly the brunette threw the newspaper aside and looked at her irritably. Well, as always lately. The man doubted that if he left her here alone she wouldn't run away again. Heiner grabbed the door handle sharply, preparing to go out. She groaned sadly and creaked open the heavy door. But slowing down a little, he told his wife not to dare leave the room. Otherwise, he would severely punish her. The brunette slammed the door loudly, clearly showing his determination, and disappeared behind it. She stood there, still with a towel around her neck, thinking about how powerless she was to change anything. The large bed was obviously too big for her. The woman, tired from the emotions of a wonderful and at the same time terrible day, tried to fall asleep. And only the witnesses of her adventures quietly nestled nearby. She heard a creak but didn't turn around but listened. The brunette was quietly approaching the bed. The man picked up the folder of documents he had brought with him and pulled them out with a rustle. He had to work despite his wife's madness, he thought. Sitting in an armchair and crossing his legs, the brunette quickly leafed through the documents. The table lamp, standing on an elegant table, shaded the beautiful silhouette of his sleeping wife, covered with a blanket. The brunette was obviously writing something. The scratching of the pen echoed in the large living room. Annette, who could not fall asleep, was not sure whether her husband wanted to see her or not. Having finished the letter, the brunette turned off the light. The old lamp sadly fell asleep in the darkness. He sat on the sofa and thought about what to do next. The man quietly, trying not to wake his wife, headed towards the couch. On it stood the suitcase that Heiner had brought with him. Suddenly she sat up in bed. She couldn't sleep. The events of the day were stirring her brain, driving away sleep. He was surprised that she was not sleeping. Heiner hoped that Annette was waiting for him. He asked her tenderly, without expecting it from himself, why she was not sleeping. The girl did not know. She stood up and walked over to the couch. Opening her purse, the blonde, out of habit, took out the sleeping pills prescribed by the doctor. But at that moment he suddenly grabbed his wife by the hand. From surprise, trying to keep her balance, she almost fell. His eyes were angry again. The brunette really didn't understand why she took these drugs every time. Was it really impossible to fall asleep naturally? Having snatched the sleeping pills from her hands, the man forbade her to touch them. The husband did not want her to depend on them. She could take care of herself. Her only problem was Heiner. The blonde sat down on the edge of the bed, not knowing what to do about it. Annette remembered with longing the times when they sometimes quarreled, but quickly made up. The girl loved him, and he reciprocated. After a quarrel, he would come up to her with a charming smile and ask for forgiveness. She couldn't be angry with him. His arms were tightly hugging her, and his kisses were driving her crazy, making her forget even that he was to blame for the death of his parents. She continued to think when she heard his voice, and saw the blue cup being held out to her from which a strange but pleasant aroma was spreading. Her eyes expressed a question and surprise. He stood there so handsome and gentle, forgetting about his game. Expressing concern for his wife, the man prepared tea, hoping to help her fall asleep. And she, looking up at him, was grateful and indignant at the same time. It was chamomile tea. As Miss Rosenberg lifted the warm cup to her lips, she felt the scent of her beloved garden, the love of her parents, and Heiner's first kiss. But the next moment something typical of her husband happened. The brunette abruptly headed towards the couch, and a minute later her brown handbag was in his hands. With the words, "Let's see what's in it now," Heiner, unceremoniously violating its boundaries, opened it. Miss Rosenberg was once again convinced that she was living with a terrible man. His mood swings and actions reflected his essence. From the depths of the bag, objects and pills emerged one after another. He was speechless at the sight of so many drugs. The brunette did not understand why she needed so many medications and why she was taking them. In moments of despair, she felt like she was going crazy. Her husband was unbearable in his imaginary hatred. Annette sat on the bed, so tiny and vulnerable. She explained to her beloved tyrant that it was medicine for her headache because she was too sensitive. Continuing to drink tea, she tried not to pay attention to what he was saying. And Heiner, examining the bag, was getting closer, as it seemed to him, to the solution of her spontaneously conceived journey. A few seconds later, Ausgar Stetter's business card was in his hand. She hadn't thrown it away but had taken it with her on the road for some purpose, he thought. Valdemar looked at her longingly and tried to remember her expression when she, without thinking, confirmed that she would reject the blonde and stay with him. Annette, watching him, saw how, approaching the coat rack, the brunette hid Oscar's business card in the pocket of his coat. The question about the existence of a restoration faction in France suddenly came from Annette's lips. He turned nervously and asked his wife who had told her such a thing. The brunette was taken aback. Could the blonde really be suggesting that Annette join this movement, helping to restore the monarchy in France? But the girl denied Oscar's influence over her. Moreover, she had no intention of secretly following him. Miss Rosenberg was simply aware of the events, she said, her head awkwardly bent over her teacup. There was no stopping him. Heiner's thoughts and words flew around the room like sharp, caustic arrows. Why did he calm her down by making tea if now he was tearing her heart and soul apart again? Her eyebrows, drawn together toward her nose, expressed despondency and fatigue. Turning her head towards him, she noticed that he once wanted to make this world a better place. Although the brunette treated her just as cruelly, people said that the world really had become better. He reacted quite specifically, coming up and pinning her to the bed with his arms. The brunette said that he had never asked her for sympathy. Her husband stood in front of her with wild eyes that she had never seen before. He asked her not to think about him, but to go with the flow. But she knew what would come next. Annette was tired of telling him that she would not follow Ausgar. But it seemed that her husband, as always, did not believe her. The brunette continued to hold her, pressing her to the bed. From the outside, it seemed that he was afraid to release her from this strange captivity. The blonde, holding the cup tightly in her hands, waited for the moment of release. She was tired and just wanted to sleep. A lone lantern, straining with its last strength, illuminated the hotel, covered by the night. The guests were asleep, but only in one room did the dark-haired man continue to wander alone. And it was Heiner. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to control his emotions and feelings. The brunette noticed this. As he was getting into bed, he accidentally pulled the blanket, but fearing that he would wake her up, he regretted it. Looking at her, the man thought about these damned circumstances that forced him to treat her so rudely. She slept, snoring softly. The chamomile tea prepared with love helped her relax. Her blonde hair in the waves that Heiner loved so much was scattered across the bedspread. He was relieved, realizing that this woman belonged only to him. Heiner looked at her sadly. Unable to resist, the man carefully straightened her blanket, recalling long-forgotten feelings. The brunette felt desire. But why didn't he take a separate room, he thought. Now, after the shock he had experienced, he wanted intimacy more than anything. The man bowed his head and thought about the feelings he experienced when the waves began to roll over her fragile body. He was still convinced that she wanted to drown, and only his intervention had prevented her. The fear of losing his beloved woman prevented him from sleeping. His breathing quickened. Valdemar got out of bed and went to the wardrobe. Perhaps the jacket his wife had been wearing on the beach would tell the secrets of that day. He was not at all embarrassed by the fact that it was her thing. There was something hard and rustling in the pockets. Shells, colored glass, and sea pebbles fell from the seabed through Annette's pocket into Heiner's palm. Earlier on the shore, the brunette had not understood what she was doing. But now everything became clear. Bending over from time to time, the girl collected the treasures of the sea in her pocket. For him, it was just trash. And now this pile of sea treasures, absolutely useless from his point of view, lay in the palm of his hand. He, without thinking about her feelings, well, as always, was already throwing everything in the trash. The spirit of the sea sadly fell silent at the bottom of the basket. He couldn't sleep. The man went out onto the huge terrace. The white semicircular railings of the balcony beckoned to lean on and dream before sleep. Or maybe to think, in the case of the brunette. And only the moon, the faithful companion of the night, winked tenderly at him in complete silence. And the rustle of the sea, coming from the coast, reminded him of the day that had passed. Heiner stood there and thought about why such things were happening in his understandable life. He took out a cigarette, out of habit from when he quit smoking, and clamped it between his teeth. After all, before meeting Annette he smoked and then he quit. But sometimes at night he liked to remind himself of it. The man felt relieved, but now he wanted to smoke. He didn't have to pretend for Annette's sake anymore, to seem better than he really was. But the brunette couldn't accept the fact that he was very scared for his wife today. He grabbed his head. At that moment the man truly understood that if there was warmth, kindness, and tenderness in him, it was exclusively for her. Her influence on him was undeniable. He took the cigarette out of his mouth with a heavy sigh. His feelings for her were killing and reviving him at the same time. He couldn't lose her. That was something Heiner knew for sure. The brunette quietly returned to the room where no one was waiting for him. And only the darkness was glad of his appearance. Suddenly he stopped abruptly and thought about something. The thought of the sea finds did not give him peace. It seemed that they were trying to decorate his tired soul with their different colors and shapes. He went to the wastebasket and looked again at the small pile of discarded sea treasures. They might have cheered and consoled his wife's sensitive soul, he thought. Heiner remembered the conversation about the uselessness of her heart. She stood there so beautiful but completely upset and lost. She loved, well, as did he, but his callousness was killing her. Today on the beach was a revelation for him. She loved the sea, the people, the artist who painted her beautiful portrait, and even these small sea wonders. She loved them until her husband came along. Any heart that does not receive emotions and love gradually becomes useless. The brunette saw how she fell into despair, but he did not want this to happen to her. He achieved his goal with incredible efforts, trampling on his love and killing her hopes. That's why he has to be with her. He needs her suffering and crushed. Forever. Annette lay so sweet and tender on a huge bed in the hotel living room. She dreamed of the sea, which she wanted to take with her. And by the bed stood a man who dreamed of living with her forever. The majestic palace appeared to the new day in all its glory. Snow-white clouds, floating across the expanses of the sky, tried to touch its spires. The luxurious garden opened its arms to feathered friends. She opened the safe. A beautiful mint-colored box, carefully storing the jewelry her husband had given her, stood shyly behind the list of donations from the people of Pedania. The dress she had chosen sat perfectly on her luxurious figure. Yes, it was quite formal, but the event was appropriate. Annette took out the box and placed it on her lap, trying to remember the emotions she felt when receiving her husband's gifts. Lost in thought, she opened the lock and charming jewelry appeared, the rainbow glow of which was reflected on her face, hair, and chest. A few minutes later, the lady, in a hat with a veil and a cherry-colored dress, got into the car. A small, elegant handbag with a secret load diluted the blonde's rather strict wardrobe. The girl sat in the back seat. She wanted to find a jewelry store that wasn't crowded. Huffine's jewelry house was the best solution, but the salon, which was located in an alley, was impossible to drive up to. But Annette didn't care. She had a plan. The massive gates of the palace were left behind as the girl set off to meet adventures she had never even imagined. The car with Miss Rosenberg stopped near the alley where the jewelry house was located. A little more and the world will forget about Miss Rosenberg, she reasoned. The man accompanying her followed her. They walked quickly down the alley to the necessary house. She looked at the sign carefully. The lady had no doubts about what she was doing, but she was frankly sorry to sell his gifts. The driver remained waiting for her at the entrance, but the decision had been made, and it was time to move forward. She rang the doorbell. A pleasant male voice was already greeting her. Entering the kingdom of jewels, Miss Rosenberg saw a rather plump man ready to do her a favor. One by one, the jewelry appeared from her bag. The jeweler asked her to put them on a purple mat, and he, putting on his glasses, began to evaluate them. He asked the lady to wait a little. Miss Rosenberg stood there, bewildered. She was already missing her jewels. as they had been given to her in the happiest moments of her life. The girl walked to the display case. Looking at the exquisite items, Annette recalled her past life. She remembered in detail the day when he gave her a diamond swan with a crown on its head, a symbol of fidelity and love for life. Her admiration knew no bounds. She looked at the figurine with delight, but she was even more delighted with Heiner, who compared her to a delicate bird. The brunette promised that she would live among beautiful things and jewelry, and she, laughing, answered that she would drown in them if he continued to give her gifts like that. She was sincerely delighted, looking at the case with the swan. Annette thought that the brunette was thus proposing to her, but she was wrong. Looking at her, kissing her beautiful hands, the man thought that the ring for a special occasion, which he ordered from a jeweler, would be luxurious. Her world was shining. Annette was the happiest of women. She loved and wanted to be with the best of men. The beautiful blonde, saying goodbye, looked longingly at the graceful swan. All the property had been seized and donated and now sold. The world must forget Miss Rosenberg. While she was thinking about how, after her death, she would not want these pieces to be known as Dietrich's daughter's jewelry, the jeweler finished his work and handed Annette an appraisal sheet. His voice was even and calm. The price of the jewels was £2,300. Annette was quite happy with that. But when she reached for the price list, she saw the most expensive piece of jewelry she owned. It was an engagement ring, encrusted with a huge diamond. The lady asked without hesitation to evaluate it too. The jeweler was taken aback. Did this lady really want to part with such a unique ring, he thought. But Annette was determined. The man, turning the ring over in his hands, said that its price was £7,000. The impressive price was explained by the fact that the thing was a designer one, and most likely made in a single copy. But, to great regret, the owner of the jewelry store did not have such funds. He said goodbye, recommending the lady another salon, and Heiner's gift returned to the hands of its beautiful owner. She looked at it as if she was seeing it for the first time. The money she got for the jewelry could easily provide a comfortable life for a person for several years. Annette was surprised, and the fact that the woman owned such an expensive engagement ring shocked her. Annette put the ring in her bag. Now the lady understood that as Miss Rosenberg she did not have such jewelry. Did Heiner think that Annette would be pleased with the proposal with such an expensive ring? A beautiful blonde, the only daughter in the family, who got everything she wanted. The heavy envelope that fell into her little hand asked to count its contents. She did not refuse, confirming the amount contained in it. Saying goodbye to the jeweler, she went out into the street. The doorbell located above the door rang loudly in farewell. They slowly moved towards the car. But after a few minutes, the events of her life would change. This was confirmed by the man who held a gun behind his back and watched them from around the corner. Annette noticed him from afar. The man was standing at the crossroads and was dressed casually. He had clearly not tidied himself up for a long time, she thought. His appearance made the blonde think. The girl looked warily at the stranger, who was suddenly walking towards them. Squeezing out the words, she hoarsely whispered to the driver that the man was looking at her strangely. The last thing Miss Rosenberg saw was hatred and anger in his eyes. But why this man hated her when she didn't even know him flashed through her mind. The criminal moving towards them pulled out a gun. She was dumbfounded, unable to take a step. The driver, without thinking, covered her with his body, trying to protect her from the shot, but it was too late. Without wasting any time, the criminal fired. Mercilessly, coldly, and calculatingly, aiming at the girl. The piercing pain took my breath away. Images of my parents and Heiner appeared and disappeared before my eyes, and suddenly everything became blurry. She couldn't stand any longer. The ground slipping away from under her feet forced her to sit down, catching the man with her hand. Glancing at her out of the corner of his eye, he realized that something irreparable had happened. While shooting at the fleeing criminal, the man constantly inquired about her condition. But the pain that spread throughout her body took away her last strength. She was scared. Writhing in pain, she asked God for only one thing: that her husband, her only and dear person, would be here. A minute later, she slid to the ground, opening her bloody hands that covered the wound. The lady tried to maintain the remnants of consciousness. Bleeding and leaning against the car, she waited for help. Her belongings were scattered around. Annette, writhing in pain, remembered that her husband had been wounded 3 times, and now she found herself in the same situation. Thoughts like butterflies fluttering between fear and hope kept her alive. She thought that Heiner had also been in pain, but he had endured it. and so could she. But the next moment Miss Rosenberg felt life leaving her. Why didn't he shoot me in the head, she thought, looking at the sky. Closing her eyes, Annette plunged into the unknown. The ringing of the telephone, breaking Heiner's working atmosphere, insistently hurried to change his life. On the other end of the line, a stranger shouted that his wife was injured. The voice continued that Annette was in the hospital and unconscious. There was horror and despair in his eyes, and his heart was beating so hard that the walls could hear it. The young man clutched the telephone receiver tightly. More than anything in the world, he wanted to see her. The voice insisted that she was in no danger. Holding the receiver, looking at the subordinates who had prepared the report, the brunette specified the place where she had been taken. It was Launcestor, Rothor Hospital. The brunette was leaving, on the move, giving orders to prepare the car. The man tore his coat off the hanger and slammed the door, running out of the office. The report of the assembled commanders had to be postponed. The brunette moved so fast that the driver who met him jumped over the steps of the stairs. The car waiting for him was parked at the entrance. To say that the man was worried was to say nothing. His hands were shaking and his eyes were filled with anxiety and fear. He was madly waiting to meet her and hoped that she would wait for him. Running up to the car, the door of which was already open, he shouted that they needed to go to Launceston, but the driver was already carrying out his orders. The car slammed the doors and picked up speed. It was taking Heiner to the one he had protected as best he could, but today he had almost lost. The road was long, and his tension was growing. The man who had once quit smoking for her sake, lighting a cigar. He had always done that before when he was scared. The smoke filled the car, but it did not bring him relief. Meanwhile, sitting in the car, the man recalled in great detail the information regarding her condition that was transmitted over the phone. She was wounded, unconscious, but her life was safe. Hammers pounded in his head. He was overwhelmed with emotion. Heiner grabbed his head, and the car was already driving him to the hospital. He remembered her at sea. Annette had been so happy not long ago, and again trials, but now for two. A building with a beautiful, well-kept territory opened up before my eyes. Parked cars and people moving back and forth did not allow this task to go unnoticed. The brunette was almost running. The hospital floor creaked under his heavy steps. The nurse's station he was approaching was almost next to him. Taking a breath, Heiner asked where Annette of Waldemar had been placed. The nurse was already ready to take him there. They moved quickly towards the room where his wife was. The brunette was hurrying her. The young man suddenly opened the door to the ward and froze on the threshold, looking at the bed on which his wife lay. Annette seemed to be asleep but was paler than usual. Her beautiful sea-like eyes were closed, and her hair like rays of sunlight was scattered on the white canvas. His loving heart was squeezed with pain. She stood like a boy, afraid to come closer. But the doctor, who was already entering the room, hurried to reassure him. He introduced himself as a responsible doctor. He was also very pleased to meet Heiner, whom he had heard about for a long time. But the brunette was only interested in her condition. The blonde concentrated. The doctor noticed that she was quickly taken to the hospital, and since the bullet did not go very deep, his wife was saved. Looking at her at that moment, it was hard to believe that the prognosis for recovery was positive. The wound should heal quickly, and she could soon return home fully recovered. But there was a huge but in this story that seemed to end well. It turned out that his wife was pregnant, and the term was quite short. Seeing his reaction, the doctor tried to find his words. Folding his hands on his stomach, he continued that perhaps the injury had caused the miscarriage. Heiner's vision darkened. The man stopped perceiving anything. Pregnancy, child, miscarriage, complications. He didn't want to hear any of it. At the word complications, he turned and looked at the doctor carefully, asking him to repeat what he had just said. The doctor, in a frightened voice, repeated what he had said earlier, but the doctor continued that perhaps his wife would now have difficulty getting pregnant. Looking at the brunette, one could assume that the man standing opposite the doctor was absent as an interlocutor. The doctor, seeing his condition, did not stop reasoning that Annette was initially a fragile woman, and even if she had carried a child, getting pregnant again would have been a problem. And Heiner's thoughts were already exploring the events of 3 months ago. She came to him late in the evening, asking whether he was busy or not that night, he recalled. Annette, with her head down, asked him to share her bed. The girl who had long dreamed of a child did not abandon this idea. She often came to him. Every time she sat on a bench in the garden, the blue-eyed blonde dreamed of a big, happy family. But over the past 3 years, Her plans to restore the relationship and have a child have not come true. But now, looking into the distance, Heiner remembered that the doctors had spoken about Annette's weak body, and some specialists had even spoken about infertility. But the doctor standing behind her insisted that she was pregnant, and Heiner, who secretly also dreamed of a child, felt unbearably sorry for her. To cheer the man up, the doctor noted that his wife would soon wake up. Valdemar asked the doctor not to tell anyone about his wife's pregnancy. The man, who had heard about the brunette's severity, did not object, additionally asking about further instructions. The brunette was still concerned about her insomnia. He didn't know if pregnancy had made her condition worse, but the doctor wasn't entirely sure. He assumed that there could have been indigestion and headaches, and the man was already remembering that green box that he had thrown in the trash. Heiner clenched his fists once again without realizing it. He was offending her, the one who still loved him, despite his attitude. The brunette looked at her, and the blonde was still sleeping after the anesthesia. He was ashamed of his actions. His wife took the drugs because she felt bad, but Heiner had already given instructions on how to select the best medicine for the girl, and the doctor was in a hurry to fulfill his request. The doctor really wanted to please Heiner, because he hadn't met a person of such stature very often, and the brunette thanked him reservedly and said goodbye. As he left, the doctor thought about Heiner's stern character, but in reality, everything turned out to be completely different from what the newspapers wrote. He saw a caring and loving person. It was strange, because there were rumors that this couple had broken up, he recalled. Oddly enough, the man had not forgotten the events of 3 months ago. The noise of a creaking door and the dim light of a nightlight indicated that a visitor had entered his room. The blonde called him, asking whether he would be free that night or not, and covering her peignoir with her hands. She was clearly embarrassed by her desires. Heiner looked at her intently, waiting for further developments, ready to continue the conversation. But if he was busy, she could leave, she said, thinking completely differently. After all, today she wanted and wished to spend happy moments with him. Without waiting for an answer, she was already touching him. Afraid that he would push her away, the girl muttered various phrases, learned over the years. But the man was not going to refuse her. The beautiful blonde, blushing, asked not to hug or kiss her. She just wanted the closeness of her loved one. But the man was already in a hurry to hug her. Heiner missed her beautiful body so much that he always waited for her to come with such a proposal, leaving all her affairs. His game of hatred was burdensome to him, but such were the rules. The beautiful, massive door of the palace slammed shut, hid their secret love, tenderness, and desires from prying eyes. The night lamps went out, waiting for their owners and spying on the love passions hovering in the room. In the light of the street lamps, 2 loving people stood opposite each other, and the approaching night hid them from prying eyes. The blonde asked him not to refuse the pleasure. She slowly undressed and waited for his embraces and actions. Heiner, holding her tenderly to himself, kissed her tenderly and greedily, afraid to miss these moments of tenderness. And the girl, clinging to him, anticipated the closeness. Her eyes were filled with the same sparks of passion that had attracted him. He laid her gently on the bed. She whispered that she missed their old relationship, when they were one in everything. Annette still sought his love, support, feelings. The brunette, listening to her languid voice, wanted to answer that he needed her just as much as before, but he did not dare. He simply enjoyed the closeness, prolonging the pleasure, and only the stars, looking into the bedroom window, showed the way to their true feelings. And the street lamps, having come to an agreement with the shadows, followed the movements of the bodies. But the next moment Annette opened her eyes. A weak and confused look saw the light in the ward and the outline of a man standing next to her. The girl sighed. What happened? Why was she in the ward? A whirlwind of thoughts like a chariot rushed through her head. But a sharp pain in her stomach brought the woman back to the events of that day. She ran her hands over her stomach. The pain was not as severe as when she was wounded, but Annette was still quite sensitive. The husband walked quickly towards her. The blonde looked at him and remembered how she wanted him to take her bloody and hopeless as soon as possible. Looking at him, she noticed his worried and frightened look. This was not quite typical of her husband, but now he wanted to support her. The man quickly went to get a doctor. The doctor who entered the room hurried to explain to her the consequences of the injury. Miss Rosenberg sat up carefully in bed. She was pale and disheveled, and the doctor had already said that the woman had been shot in the stomach and might have lost the baby. Her big blue eyes looked at the doctor with concern. Annette thought that the doctor had been wrong about the pregnancy. But she had been feeling bad lately, she thought. The brunette jerked the door open and was about to leave. She turned to him. The charming blonde, making excuses, attributed her poor health to heightened sensitivity. Annette said that she wanted a child with all her heart. The girl understood that today a terrible event had happened in her life, and it was not an injury. And now, when the baby was about to be born, she had lost him without even knowing he was there. Annette was devastated. He began to reassure her. Heiner had said that the news of the miscarriage would be kept secret. But what difference did that make to her? Waldemar promised to take care of it, but Miss Rosenberg was already mourning her lost happiness. A few hours ago, Heiner's men detained the criminal, and now they were investigating the goals and motives of the attack. The brunette told her about it. He will definitely be punished for the attempted murder of the child. Only the beautiful young woman who lost her baby today was not at all worried about this news. Interrupting him, the woman quietly asked how many weeks pregnant she was. She wanted to know more about her unborn child. The man replied that she was 11 weeks pregnant. For some reason, she, like him, immediately remembered that evening when their feelings were mutual. Annette felt his tenderness, desire, and feelings, as at the beginning of their relationship. Heiner bit his lip. He knew she wanted this baby. 3 years had passed since their wedding, and doctors still shrugged their shoulders when they asked about the pregnancy. Her hand pressed tightly to her stomach. Adopt pounded in her temples. It was out of the question now, the blonde thought. Annette, looking at Heiner with an indignant look, did not understand what he was talking about. But for her sake, he was ready to do anything, even accept someone else's child. Heiner, not taking her answer seriously, was indignant. He repeated his question again regarding the child. But she didn't need someone else's baby. She didn't see any need for it. Annette was sure that the brunette had never thought about a child. Tired of listening to him, the girl tried to close the topic. Moreover, Miss Rosenberg, reasoning emotionally, considered the current situation in which the child was not born to be normal. The brunette stopped understanding his wife. The upset woman, with her head down, explained to him that their baby could be unhappy, given her reputation. Sitting in bed with an IV drip in her wrist, the girl begged her husband to agree with her. The stupid reasoning upset him. Heiner felt broken, unable to bear the emotional torture. A tear rolled down his cheek. The man was disarmed by the circumstances of his personal life. The brunette looked at her with a confused look, not understanding why she was so nervous. After all, Heiner had never thought about a child at all. Doctors had been telling her for years that it would be difficult for her to get pregnant. He hadn't expected that to happen. A beautiful woman, deeply grieving, stated that their child would be politically disadvantageous. This was true, although completely unreasonable. It dawned on Heiner. A child from a woman he hated and could never love was really no use to anyone, he thought. Moreover, the loss of such a child, Heiner reflected, was actually a blessing in disguise. There was common sense in this realization. The entourage supporting the brunette would have opposed this. His reputation could have been at risk. So for him, for the child, and for his comrades, the situation was working out well. But now his wife was in the room, who had lost their child, but whom he loved strangely but strongly. The brunette asked again the question that was troubling him, regarding whether she wanted to have a child or not. "Why would she want that?" she said quietly, looking at her husband with a lost look. The conversation was reaching a dead end. Heiner leaned forward and tried to explain that he cared, but Annette cut him off abruptly, saying that she didn't understand what he wanted to ask. But the brunette did not calm down. He obviously did not know Annette well, and at that moment her patience was coming to an end. Miss Rosenberg's face changed and she turned into a fury. Her naked nervous system could no longer withstand his actions and imaginary care. Annette screamed like crazy that she did not need a child. She did not need anything at all now. Out of breath and weakened by the operation, she continued to shout that everything had happened for the best. The lady hoped that she would be heard. He looked at her in confusion, and Miss Rosenberg didn't understand when he would finish mocking her. Tired of the tension, the pain, his presence, and the complete lack of understanding, the blonde fell silent. She knew that this was the only way to get rid of him. The huge window of the chamber greeted the evening, but the lanterns that served the people tried to fight the mistress of darkness. The beautiful woman, tired from a hard day, wanted only one thing: for her husband to leave. She lay down, indicating that the conversation was over. But he could not move. Valdemar looked at his wife with a tender and sympathetic look. He, like her, was in pain. He could not say what he felt, but his heart was breaking into pieces. She couldn't sleep. And how could a woman who had lost her child sleep peacefully? Her dream was shattered like a glass castle. Lying in the huge room, tired and broken, Annette analyzed what had happened. Perhaps her selfishness was the reason for the loss of the child, or her desperate desire to have one. After all, if she had given birth to him, Annette reasoned, the baby might have encountered the harsh realities of this world. And the most important thing in this story was that his mother was Miss Rosenberg. She understood and realized everything. With a feeling of emptiness and cold inside herself, Annette fell asleep. A week later, the doctor, scribbling with his pen, was ready to discharge her from the hospital. She had almost recovered from her injury and was ready to go home. She sat opposite the doctor, and Heiner, who rarely left her alone, stood next to her. The doctor, having reviewed her medications at the request of the brunette, selected new drugs. After all, some of the medications she took were prohibited during pregnancy, but she could not have imagined that pregnancy would occur. The blonde no longer hoped for a miracle in these 3 years. The doctor was puzzled. He could not understand how Annette did not notice the absence of her periods. But even for her, it remained a question. Her doctor had indeed mentioned stopping the medications if she became pregnant, she recalled. But life events had taken those recommendations away from her. Looking at the confused woman, sitting with her head down, well, just like when he first met her, the doctor understood everything. He was already in a hurry to prescribe her other drugs. Looking at the medications, she realized that she had been taking the same ones for a long time, but she had no desire or strength to argue or resist. The Valdemar family noisily closed the massive door and left the doctor's office. The girl was willing to accept anything, just so that everyone would leave her alone. They found themselves again in a huge room, which made her feel sick, as did the constant presence of Heiner, who, having abandoned all his affairs, left her only at night. He hugged her softly, and she, so small and fragile, felt his big hand on her back and began to cry again. Miss Rosenberg sat on the edge of the bed, her arms crossed and her head down. What was she thinking? He wondered. Perhaps the imminent discharge had upset her so much, he wondered. The man started first. He talked about her changing her doctor, whose treatment could have disappointing consequences, but the girl did not react to him at all. He repeated his proposal again, but louder. The blonde calmly replied that there was no need for that. He didn't understand how the woman could say that, since the doctor hadn't even noticed that she was pregnant. Annette, clutching her head, repeated once again that everything was fine and it didn't matter anymore. But Valdemar, as always, tried to clarify why it didn't matter, since it concerned her health. Her head was splitting. Miss Rosenberg considered that it was absolutely useless to argue with him and asked him to do as he thought best. The beautiful woman was on the verge of a breakdown. He was smothering her with his love and care. His sympathetic words were killing her for days, but they were supposed to support her. But her husband went further, offering Annette psychological counseling. All she needed now was to leave this place. She wanted to go home. Her husband said that Annette would be provided with everything she needed at home, and she knew this, and he would try to be caring and gentle. Suddenly his gaze fell on her hand. The man noticed that the wedding ring that she never took off was missing from her ring finger, but today it was missing. He looked closely at Annette, and she, as always with her eyes downcast, already understood that a storm was about to break out. Heiner, approaching her, looked into her beautiful blue eyes. She did not immediately figure out what to answer to his question about the absence of the ring, but quickly pulled herself together and squeezed out that she had taken it off. Annette continued that it no longer mattered. But for Heiner, the wedding ring, which he never took off, played a huge role. His gaze dimmed. He had tried so hard to save her, having spent so much time with her in the ward, that such an answer upset him. Turning around and putting his hands behind his back, as he did when he was about to think something over, the brunette headed for the exit. The casually thrown-out word "rest" from his lips spoke eloquently of the fact that he was offended. The worsening weather was depressing. Large drops of rain were actively pounding the roof of the hospital, and the rising wind, stirring the trees, was trying to disperse the gathering clouds. But despite the bad weather, people were already gathering near the porch under umbrellas, and they were waiting for the Valdemar couple. The journalists wanted a sensation, because the information about the miscarriage could not be hidden. Annette, standing by the window, saw trouble approaching in the form of the assembled public. She understood that they would not be let go so easily. The blonde recalled the moments when reporters constantly pestered her. After all, Heiner never stood up for her. He valued his reputation too much. The brunette, abruptly opening the door, entered the ward. The lady looked back and realized that it was time to go. The black outfit she was wearing did not suit the young woman at all. Heiner, having finished all the business with her stay in the hospital, was in a hurry to leave the hospital. It was noticeable that the man was tense, but he had to go. They quickly walked through the hall, approaching the central exit of the hospital. Heiner's bodyguards were doing their job properly. She looked worried, but Heiner encouraged her as best he could. The brunette asked her not to answer any questions, no matter what they asked. But the next moment the massive hospital door opened, and the Waldemar couple, in the light of camera flashes, walked out onto the street. A swarm of journalists surrounded them like a beehive and began asking various questions regarding Annette's health, the reason for the attack, and even a possible connection with the suspect. The blonde, tightly clutching the handles of her bag, pushed her way through the crowd of onlookers, her head down. It seemed to her that the flow of questions would never end. Reporters, realizing that she was not ready to give an interview, provoked her with personal questions. Suddenly, Annette's ears were caught by a female voice that was clearly trying to call her name. She glanced around the crowd, trying to see who it belonged to. But the next moment, pushing through the crowd, a woman under a large green umbrella was already hurrying towards her. Pushing the crowd aside with her free hand, the lady very quickly found herself next to the blonde. Madame Valdemar looked in surprise at the bold stranger, who clearly had something to say. Her wardrobe betrayed a woman of the lower class. Over the noise of the rain and the screams of journalists, she introduced herself as the sister of Annette's attacker, David Bakima.